Hi, welcome back to Power of Storytime. I'm Kate, the creative director of Calling Card Books, and today we are going to be discussing A Quick Succession of Busy Nothings, the Jane Austen themed coloring book I made. And every Wednesday at noon Pacific time, we also read a kid's book, and we've been working our way through The Passage at Moose Beach. So we hope you'll join us on Wednesday when we continue this, and if you missed any of that, you can visit our Facebook page or our YouTube page to catch up. And this has been a very long week. It's been a very long pandemic, so things may go off the rails, and I am drinking beer out of a teacup, so that's how things are today. But we appreciate you all tuning in and supporting us, and if you are interested in any of our books, you can go to callingcardbooks.com to purchase them. We really appreciate those of you who have supported us so far by buying books, because it not only helps us as the publisher, but it helps the authors, the printers, and if you decide to purchase through your local indie bookstore by going to IndieBound, then you're helping support them as well. So together we can create a little community and creativity during this very confusing time. Let me stop and take a sip. And usually I interview the authors, but since I am the author today, I'm joined by someone who understands pandemics very well. It's Shakespeare himself here to ask me a few questions.
Thank you very much, Kate. Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to be here and represent authors near and far, healthy authors and not so healthy authors, authors and books everywhere. It is my honor to interview and help us all get to know Kate Zarrella. So tell us a little bit about your journey into publishing and what is a creative director?
That's a great question, Shakespeare. Thanks for popping in. So my journey, I've always loved books and loved reading, and I've always assumed I was going to be a writer. I was an English major in college, so I spent my time studying Shakespeare and Jane Austen. Did a double major, English and psychology. Always thought I would go into publishing and maybe specifically do psychology writing. And then I ended up working in customer service for a while doing tech support, and I learned a lot about the technical side of things, and my mother and business partner had her company as I was working for this other company, and occasionally I would help her with editing or, designing little things here and there, because I'd always used Photoshop and I'd always designed stuff as a kid. But then eventually I came on board full-time, and now my role is doing all the design and technical things. So I do the websites and book covers and book interiors, and made my own book. And creative director is a term that I came up with while sitting in a hot tub, because I wasn't sure what else to call all of that. So that's been my journey.
I am fascinated by the fact that you studied the written word and the human mind, and what you do is computers and graphics. Tell me a little bit about how that came to be.
Well, that's one of those things where when I went to school, I didn't really know myself yet and didn't really know the world yet, so I just knew that I liked books. And then a couple years into college, I figured I needed something to, write about, so I chose psychology because that seemed interesting. But I've always been very creative. I've always played around on Photoshop, manipulating pictures of my horses, and this is going to be extremely nerdy, but I used to play a virtual reality game that revolved around horses, and I would make pictures of horses for other people and sell them for fake money. So I've kind of always been designing. I would also create little HTML layouts, so I've always been doing websites, and I just didn't realize that was a job that people would pay you real money for. So I didn't think about that when it came to studying, but I've always done that. And I've always had an interest in interior design as well, so I guess without realizing it, design has always been a part of me.
Yes, I understand by the floor director that the first thing you did was create a cover for your business partner's novel years ago, and then she had a book that actually sits right above your head. That is a fully illustrated book that needed an ebook, and I don't know what ebook is, but she says that illustrated ebooks are very complicated, so she asked you if you wanted to take a stab at it. And you did?
Yes, that is true, Shakespeare. Yeah, I've always been very game to, I love learning, so I love trying new things that I've never done before. And I feel pretty comfortable in the realm of anything Photoshop related or, you know, vaguely tech related. So I figured with the help of Google that I would be able to figure out how to do an ebook. And it was a very steep learning curve figuring out how to do All About Water because it's got a ton of beautiful illustrations by Audrey Lai, but oh my goodness, is it hard to format illustrations correctly in ebook form, especially if you are working out of Microsoft Word and if you've never done it before. But I figured out how to do it, and then based off how difficult that was, I taught myself Adobe InDesign instead because that is actually a much easier way to design books. But I've really enjoyed all of the different challenges of figuring out how to design and create different types of books, and always get better at my craft through practice.
And I'm very curious to find out, what is a coloring book?
A coloring book is outlines of an image that you get to add your own colorful flair to. I'm trying to think of what the Tudor era equivalent of that would be, but maybe it's in the vein of an illuminated manuscript per se.
Ah.
But it's illuminated yourself more.
So tell us more about the coloring book with the lovely Miss Jane Austen as a theme.
Yeah, so I want to take everybody through all of the pages of a quick succession of busy nothings. And as I said, I'm an English major, so I absolutely fell in love with all things Jane Austen after I saw the 2005 Pride and Prejudice and then started reading all of the novels. Yeah, and I've, of course, being a huge Austen fan, have taken the pilgrimage to go see Jane Austen's house museum and yeah, went to Bath to see all the places that it features heavily in a lot of her novels. So I have some water from Bath right here. It's not to be drunk per the instructions on the bottle, but it can be rubbed in, which is fun. Yeah, so we had a couple ideas for the title. This is a quote, or not even a quote, it's from the book Mansfield Park, but it's not a quote that a character says, it's just the narrator speaking. But Jane Austen, like the way she writes, there's so many beautiful gems even when it's not dialogue. So I'm going to read that little section where the quote comes from. So it's chapter 10 of Mansfield Park. Dinner was soon followed by tea and coffee. A 10 minutes drive allowed no waste of hours, and from the time of their sitting down to table, it was a quick succession of busy nothings till the carriage came to the door. And I think we can all agree right now that the world feels like a quick succession of busy nothings, like we're all kind of sitting around and a lot of things are happening, but really it's nothing at the same time. And that's just the beauty of Jane Austen, is that she has all these little turns of phrase that will always be relevant, and like the longer you sit with it, the more it makes sense and the more relevant it is, even nowadays. But I guess I will go ahead and jump in and show you what the inside looks like. If I can. I need to get rid of this. Excuse me while we have these technical difficulties. So some of this, and Shakespeare, do you have a question?
I am fascinated by this. Is that art?
Oh, this is not art yet. This is what we call a copyright page. And I just wanted to mention that some of the artwork in here is original to a version of Jane Austen's novels. It's the 1906 printing of the novels and letters of Jane Austen, which was illustrated by H.M. Brock. And there are also some illustrations from Hugh Thompson, who was also a British illustrator, who was born in 1860 and died in 1920, and illustrated quite a few editions of Jane Austen's novels as well. They lived a little bit after her, but she was pretty popular at that point. So this is a
Jane.
This is based on the 1873 Wilson and Company engraving of Jane Austen, which is in turn based off of her sister Cassandra Austen's portrait of Jane, which I have here. So it's based off of this, and this is my
Jane.
This is my first attempt at basically tracing something in Illustrator, so that is why she looks mildly terrifying. So my apologies for that. And I do want to say that the pictures I'm showing on here are from the most recent and updated version of the coloring book. This is the first edition, which we have about 30 copies of them, so if you would like the first edition, it's got a few errors and some interesting changes from the current version. So we are selling it for only $8, and it comes with a set of colored pencils. If you're interested in that, you can have a fun scavenger hunt to see what spelling errors I put in there. But this updated version is available online on Amazon or through your local indie bookstore. They'll be able to order it. All right, so that's Jane. And this is from...
It's lovely.
It's one of H.M. Brock's illustrations from depicting a scene from Sense and Sensibility. So this is Eleanor and Edward sitting together after he has been released from his engagement, and they're able to like be in love again. Sorry, that was very Alexis Rose. Right, and then this is a quote from Emma, which just came out in movie form. I did not necessarily like it, but you should watch it and make your own judgments, because Clueless will always be my favorite version of Emma, because I'm trash. But this quote is, "I always deserve the best treatment because I never put up with any other." And Emma is known for being the kind of upper-class hoity-toity girl who, through trial and error and very poor matchmaking, learns that she doesn't know everything, and she really, really loves her next-door neighbor, if you don't know the story of Emma. And this is just a cute illustration of some teacups and birds, because tea is very British. And then for Mansfield Park we have the quote, "But indeed I would rather have nothing but tea." And personally I'm not a huge fan of Mansfield Park. Fanny is kind of a bummer, and I do love a bummer because Anne Elliot is kind of one too, but I see a lot of myself in her, so I like her. But yeah, I don't get the draw of Mansfield Park so much. But if you have a different opinion, feel free to leave a comment and we can chat about it.
Where was made that art?
This art is a mix of some stock vector art that I purchased and then just assembled into this cute little thing. But the tabletop I did draw myself. And this was back when I started, so I didn't really know how to make vector art. Nowadays I could make this on my own, but back in the day I needed some help because this was published in 2018, so it's a couple years old. Now this I did make from scratch. This is Chatsfield House, which stood in as Pemberley for the 2005 Pride and Prejudice, and I believe maybe also the 1995 miniseries, but perhaps not. And that was, ooh, my mouse isn't working. That was based, oh, and this was the original color illustration of Edward and Eleanor. And this is Chatsworth House that I based it off of. I basically traced out this picture and added textures and things that make it a little bit more fun to color. It is a beautiful historic property, and if you ever get the chance to go and see it, it's absolutely breathtaking. And I won't lie, I really appreciate the families that these houses have been handed down, but nowadays they're incredibly expensive to keep up. So they open them up to the public in an effort to keep these historic houses running and not let them run into disrepair. So I don't know, I just think that's very, very impressive because I love keeping history alive. And I think that's a cool way to do it. Okay. Let me take another one sip. Yeah, so this I did make myself, and it's got quite a bit of detail, so pretty proud of that. And then, the line that everyone loves. It is a truth universally acknowledged from Pride and Prejudice that every man in possession of a fortune must be in want of a wife, which I don't know if that's true anymore, but back in the day, apparently that was. All right, and this is another one of the H.M. Brock illustrations from Pride and Prejudice. This is the scene where Elizabeth Bennet meets Mr. Darcy for the first time, and he's a rude dude. It's the beginning of their wonderful enemies to lovers trope, which we all appreciate. And this is the original color illustration. Oops. And then we have another wonderful Pride and Prejudice quote. "What are men to rocks and mountains?" And this is when Lizzie is touring the countryside with her aunt and uncle after having some personal issues. And I feel like many people who have been jilted in love or had some romantic issues can commiserate with this quote. And this is just another cute pattern. It's some little sewing scissors, which back in the Regency era that Jane Austen lived in, ladies of means, embroidery and gentle sewing was a genteel art, so that felt very, very suitable for this. Oops. And now, from my favorite novel, Persuasion, which is, hi Shakespeare, which is Jane Austen's final novel, and many believe it to be her best novel, because it's a little bit more sad than some of the earlier ones, but it does have a very sweet, happy ending to go along with like the opening, which is kind of Anne Elliot mourning her lost love, and by the end they find each other again and find their happy ending. But the quote is, "Let us never underestimate the power of a well-written letter." And that is very true, even if your letter is sent by text. Send someone some love right now, because it's a rough time. But this illustration I did make myself by tracing, and a really pivotal scene in the book is when Wentworth, Anne's love interest, realizes that they've maybe reconnected a little bit, because they kind of have some back and forth and some misunderstandings as to whether or not they still like each other. And he writes her this absolutely beautiful letter where I am half agony, half hope that she might still love him. So the text in here is the text of that letter, because that's one of the hallmarks of Jane Austen, is that her heroes write very beautiful love letters to the heroines when they're, making amends for having effed up, essentially. And this is one of the best, in my opinion.
To write one's thoughts clears the mind and allows newness to enter.
Mm. Or as you said, the play's the thing. So this is one of my more controversial quotes, because it is in fact not from Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice novel itself, but it is a quote from the 2005 movie version, which is not quite as true to the book, but I think it's lovely, so I added it in there. And technically, it's Jane Austen adjacent at the very least, so it's "We are all fools in love," which, that's pretty true. All right, and this is another H.M. Brock illustration, and this is from Mansfield Park. I'm not gonna lie, I don't love that book, so I'm not exactly sure what's being depicted here. I'm pretty sure it's Fanny, but I'll have to let you tell me. If you know, leave a comment. And this is the full color original illustration that is based off of. All right. And then next is a wonderful quote from Northanger Abbey that's attributed to Jane Austen a lot, because it's about books. It's, "The person who has not pleasure in a good novel must be intolerably stupid." And that's why we love Jane, because she really knows how to, give a good burn. And this is another one where I traced, and I don't know if you can tell, but this is the tabletop from an earlier illustration that I've repurposed here. But this is all of her novels, including Lady Susan, which is not a full novel, but one of her shorter kind of unfinished works, which was turned into the movie Love and Friendship on Amazon. If you're feeling like a recommendation for a Jane Austen movie, that's a great one. I love Northanger Abbey. It's her first book, and it feels very much like fan fiction. It's like her trying to understand novels by writing one, because it plays on a lot of tropes from Gothic novels. And it's just delightful. It's a little bit sillier than some of the others, and the heroine, whose name I'm blanking on right now, unfortunately, is a bit more of a doofus than many of the other Austen heroines, but that's why we love her. And this is another kind of sewing-based pattern. It felt very on brand for Jane Austen, so I added it in there. Catherine Morland is Northanger Abbey. Okay, we can continue now. And this is a Hugh Thompson illustration. There's a couple of his in here, and this is from chapter 34 of Pride and Prejudice, the version that he illustrated. This is Elizabeth reading a letter from Jane. And it is also, in part, the cover of the book. I made a couple of changes to it. I added some color to her dress and took out some of the detail. And I also added in a little piece of paper with some lines from Jane Austen's novel on it and gave her a little quill. Because in this picture she's holding a book, but I edited that out and gave her a little quill. And I believe it says, "It's a truth universally acknowledged." I actually did type something out and make it very, very small, but it is too small to read by the human eye now, so I could be wrong about that. Alright, and this is another Pride and Prejudice quote, another one about how tricky love is. "A girl likes to be crossed a little in love now and then. It gives her something to think of." Yeah, I think that one speaks for itself. Can be true. Love's fun. You can get lost in it sometimes. And then we have one from Sense and Sensibility. "Her sorrows, her joys could have no moderation." And Sense and Sensibility is kind of an interesting one. It's maybe a little bit hard to read. It's kind of dense compared to some of the other novels, but it's a beautiful story, and in movie form, it's very, very entertaining. But basically, it's the two sisters, Eleanor and Marianne. One is sense, one is sensibility, which means like your feelings and kind of an overabundance of feelings in this case. And Marianne has all the feelings, and Eleanor is very restrained and has all the sense. And it's about how having too much of each alone is kind of problematic, because you need to have enough sense to not let your sensibility run wild, but not so much sense that you don't have any. So this is about Marianne and her abundance of feeling, which gets her into some trouble, gets her cold, gets her a bad boyfriend, but, you know, she ends up with Colonel Brandon in the end, so it's alright. And this is another H.M. Brock illustration from Sense and Sensibility. This is the very sensible Eleanor talking to their landlord slash neighbor, Sir John, through the window about some of Marianne's questionable behavior with her hot neighbor who she's really into, but who is not a great dude. Oh, let me show you this is the original illustration from the cover. And then this is Marianne illustrated in color. And this has got to be my favorite Austen quote of all time. I don't know how out of context I'm taking it, but I think it's a pretty sick burn. So this is talking about the Musgrove's good-for-nothing son, who was a sailor, was really bad at it, and then eventually died at sea. And the quote is, "He had been nothing more than a thick-headed, unfeeling, unprofitable Dick Musgrove, who had never done anything more than the abbreviation, to entitle to himself to more than the abbreviation of his name, living or dead." Which to me is like a really wonderful Regency era Dick joke. I might be taking that out of context, but I think it's terrific. That's part of the reason I love Jane Austen, because she has a terrifically biting wit at times. What do you think, Shakespeare? You had some pretty good set downs. I love your words. Moonbeam, Shakespeare.
Thank you.
Bedroom, also a word by Shakespeare.
Thank you.
Yes. All right.
Do you mean Richard?
Richard? Yes, Richard Musgrove.
Thank you.
He's a dick. And this, oops, stop. This is another illustration that I made of Jane Austen's house, which is now a museum, and I believe it's in Steventon? Yeah, but it's this sweet little brick building out in the countryside. I had a lot of trouble finding it, but as you can see here, this was me walking on the Jane Austen Trail, or the Jane Austen Trail, to find her place. I had to take a bus there. I got off at the wrong stop. I got very lost for a couple of hours, but I did eventually make it. It's absolutely beautiful, and if you love Austen, you should definitely stop and visit there.
Tell me, how were you able to visit all of these places in my home?
Well, my senior year of college, the final quarter, I studied abroad in England, and it was a work-study program. So I was a marketing intern at a very small nonfiction publishing company called Reaction Books. It was a really terrific experience. I learned a ton working for them, and it was kind of my first step into the realm of publishing, and I did a little bit of copy editing, and I did some marketing things, and just learned a ton. And we had some excursions. We went to Bath as part of the study abroad. We went to Stratford-upon-Avon as part of the study abroad, which is Shakespeare's home. And then on my own, I went to Jane Austen's house because when in Rome.
Will you do one of these books of my works?
Yes, my plan for the next coloring book would be Shakespeare. Or maybe I'll have to pick one specific Shakespeare title and do something that. We'll see. Or maybe a comedies, tragedies. Probably stick to comedies first. Oh, it's too far away, but I have a cross stitch that says, "What an ass am I," which is a fun Shakespeare quote. All right, and then this is the social distancing mantra that we all really need right now. It's from one of Jane Austen's letters to her family member, and it is, there is nothing like staying at home for real comfort. And boy, is that true now more than ever. Stay at home, kids. And sadly, she requested that most of her correspondence be destroyed upon her death because those were considered very, very private, and it was very rude for you to show personal private correspondence to anyone other than the correspondee, which is a plot point in Persuasion, because we were shown in a very ungenteel fashion some letters between a woman's husband and Anne's cousin. So sadly, we're missing a lot of her letters, but this is from one that still survives. And this is another H.M. Brock illustration. This is when Jane goes to Lady Catherine's place, Rosings, as a guest of Charlotte Lucas and her new husband, Mr. Collins, and she is playing piano very poorly for Colonel Fitzwilliam and Mr. Darcy, who is now totally into her. And this is the color illustration. All right. And then we have another wonderful Persuasion quote. "How quick come the reasons for approving what we like." And isn't that a thing to live by, where suddenly once we like something, we can find a whole bunch of reasons why it's a good idea and not a bad idea. Hence all the other quotes about love that you've read so far today. But yeah, really, read Persuasion. It's terrific. And then back in the vein of tea, we have a cute little pattern with a tea kettle and a teacup. Very on brand. And then this is a reference to a scene in Emma where they're kind of playing around and they have these little tiles where it's a game of spelling things out. And I believe it's Knightley spells out blunder because Emma was kind of a jerk earlier, and he wants to let her know that she made a huge social misstep by insulting one of her inferiors in a way that was a little too close to home when she was trying to show off for the guy she was into, but ended up being needlessly cruel to someone poor and beneath her station, because Emma's quite well-to-do and the cool girl in the neighborhood. So we have that with a nice little cup of tea, and this was of my own design. And then this is another H.M. Brock illustration from Persuasion. This is when Jane has fallen terribly ill from her walk in the rain to go see Bingley, or Bingley's sister actually, he's not supposed to be there. So she is then forced, because the walk is so long and so treacherous, to stay there until she's well, so that causes Elizabeth to go as well to oversee her welfare, and leads to all sorts of shenanigans between everybody. So this is her being genteelly ill. And then we have the original color illustration of poor Jane. And this is just a lovely English cottage that was another one of my own design I traced, based off a picture. Nothing, not a real picture from Jane Austen's house or anything. But. And then this is an illustration by Hugh Thompson, and it's not necessarily Jane Austen specifically related, but it's kind of a joke on Regency era matchmaking. And it has all of the sisters, the man looking to see which one he wants to become his wife, and a sign that says not for sale. And I think it's just a wonderful modern take on the marriage market that was so important in Regency England, because for the most part women didn't have their own agency, unless they were a wealthy heiress whose property wasn't entailed to a male relative. They didn't have their own money, and they had to rely for the most part on who they married for their station in life. Unless they wanted to become a seamstress or a governess or things like that, which were generally very hard labor and looked down upon by the upper classes. So it's kind of a tricky spot for them to be in, which is why sometimes in retrospect, like, people think, oh, Jane Austen stories are just about marriage and it's really outdated, but like, for the time, she was pretty darn feminist. Another reason you should read Persuasion, because they have a whole conversation about how history is written by men. So that's fun. It's feminist. Ye olde feminist, but it's feminist. And oops. This is another, based on a Hugh Thompson illustration, but I have taken it apart and turned it into a pattern, so it's a little fun. It's a mother and her daughters walking through the street, but now it's been separated. And then last but not least, this is another one that some people might be completely offended by, because it is a quote from the 2005 Pride and Prejudice movie. When Mr. Collins comes over to eat dinner, he's a real freaking weirdo, and he has to comment on the meal. So he says, "It has been many years since I've had such an exemplary vegetable." And I just think it's wonderful, so I put it in there. And yeah, do you have anything else to say, Shakespeare? I really appreciated you joining us for this broadcast and for interviewing me.
Well, I am fascinated by modern design and things I can see but not touch, and food I can not smell, but it looks wonderful.
It's delicious.
And yes, a cold beverage of choice. I will leave you now and find one for myself. Thank you for having me.
Terrific. Thank you for joining us. And thank you all for joining us on Power of Storytime. We hope you will join us again next Friday at 5 p.m. Pacific Time, as we will be reading from one of our fabulous fiction or nonfiction books for adults, and also join us on Wednesday at noon Pacific Time as we continue to read from Passage at Moose Beach. If you'd like to read some sample chapters for free, if you go to callingcardbooks.com/read-now, you can read from every one of these books a couple of pages. And also, if you would like to color a little bit, I've made a special social distancing Jane Austen themed coloring page and added another one in there. So if you go to callingcardbooks.com/freebie, you can download the free coloring pages. And again, if you would like to purchase the coloring book, we would really appreciate it. You can do it on our website, or you can do it through your local indie bookstore. But we really appreciate you joining us, and thanks for watching. Stay healthy.